one of the things that really struck me in all of my field notes is the number of analogies that people use to the American West, European colonialism, Antarctica, the NACA and the Kelly-Amell Act of 1925, the funding of Columbus's trips to the New World, and any range of other historical analogies. And they get used so often that you can almost hear the eye rolling in the audience, right? Because everyone knows these analogies and everybody knows why they're being used. And they're used in order to make an argument toward how this historical moment would be like some kind of future moment in history, or the process that happened in the past we could analogize to a future in a moment in the future. But I also think that in part what this community wants to do is to do away with analogy, right? Again, to see things for the first time in ways that are not possible in any way to analogize to things that had happened on Earth, right? To have embodied experiences, especially the experience of weightlessness, the kind of expansive view of space that of the Earth and space and so on, that will enable one to say this is not like anything else that any person has done before. And to be able to to tell a new kind of story about it. Now, the problem with that, and the problem, in fact, with all analogy is, or rather, the problem with that and the problem with analogy is that history is always hidden somewhere in there. Right? We can never leave history entirely behind. Just the fact of being able to see something new and experience something new, it has to have been facilitated by all of human history, basically getting you to that point, right? And your very ways of seeing, your very ways of experiencing newness is itself culturally and historically formed. Likewise, what analogy does is to highlight similarities between things, right? It takes something that happened in one domain and attaches it to something that happens in another domain. But analogies thereby include, right? They include similarities, but they also work by excluding dissimilarities, right? So you might take, for example, the expansion into the Western frontier, right? In the American frontier, which is usually narrated in this community as, hardy homesteaders going out there and making it work for themselves. But of course, there was enormous infrastructure behind that, right? There was an enormous infrastructure which enabled that, including federal support of the movement out west. So history. So I think humans do try and escape from history. I don't think we can ever be successful at that, and in part because we take language with us. Right? We're defined, I would argue, in part, very, very greatly by our signifying capacity, our symbolic capacity. And symbols carry history with them. Language carries history. Language carries ideology. Language carries its past with it. And so that when you say, "Oh, this is new," it is new, but it's simultaneously already being shaped by history. This is, I think, the great burden that we bear as humans, in a sense, is that disjuncture between newness and oldness, between the what is coming before us in front of our eyes for the first time, and what we already know that shapes our experience of that coming to know about the new. This is not to in any way invalidate our desire to seek out the new, or to argue that it has been preformed, because we know that things do change, right? This is not the same world that we lived in 4, 8, 100 years ago, right? It's a very different place. But I think that there may be a desire to escape history, but I don't think it's ever entirely successful. I hear a lot of claims about human nature in terms of this desire to want to see something that is new and to get rid of history, or to erase history, and that certainly is a very broadly distributed theme in certainly modern Western in the modern Western tradition. In fact, the the modern era is even characterized by this desire for the new. But it is also the case that even among modern humans, in fact, one could even make a case that this is a primary impulse among modern Western humans to stay the same, right? To keep things just as they are, not to move, to stay put, to be at home, to feel comfortable, to know what's coming tomorrow, to be sure. And if we look at the current presidential campaign, right, the current political climate and the presidential campaign that's now underway, we can see precisely these kinds of arguments about moving forward and staying true to something, right? Whether it's the Constitution, whether it's to something called traditional values, whatever it might be. So these claims to newness and or desire for newness and the desire to be rooted in something in the past are very, they're not contradictory, but they're mutually constitutive in some ways, but in a very messy, as we often see in politics, right, in a very messy kind of way. So I would say that human nature is also directed toward wanting to be comfortable and to stay put, and not to actually have anything too surprising or too new on the horizon. But I think it's also possible, and I can say this as an anthropologist because one of the things that anthropologists have famously pointed out is that humans are easily capable of holding perfectly contradictory ideas in their heads. Right? We're very, very good at it. So I would say that this desire to move forward and to remain true in some way to a past, some kind of imagined past, are both equally human, and they're equally part of what we might call human nature, or certainly part of our cultural heritage